Thank you guys. Yeah, my actual name is Ronald, but I go by Ronnie. If you've been here like the last half of the summer, so that's been a lot of fun. Everyone's been so nice here. It's been also nice my first time in Michigan, exploring the area. So that's been really cool. So my project is evaluating climate models in the Great Lakes region, specifically, looking at observational data against GFDL CM4 output, and also creating a climate report card. I would just like to thank Abby and my other advisor, Rachel Kelly, CIGLR for giving me this opportunity, everyone here at GLRL. It's been such a nice place to work the past month and a half, and GLISA with the climate report card, and the University of Michigan also for this opportunity. A little bit about me. I'm from LaGrangeville, New York, so it's about an hour north of New York City. You probably have never heard of it. I am a rising senior at Cornell. I spent my first actual year at Penn State, also studying atmospheric science. And some of my research interests include climate modeling, catastrophe modeling, and I also find a lot of extreme precipitation work very interesting, and have also gotten a lot of interest in policy, climate policy and framework in the past few years. Some non-academic interests, you can see I love to hike. It's the Grand Canyon, Knife's Edge in Maine. That's the end of the Appalachian Trail. Really cool. I got to explore some of the UP this summer, and that's one of the lighthouses up near Pictured Rocks. I also love music, and I'm a huge college football fan. I used to be a Michigan hater, actually, because I'm such a big Penn State football fan, but I've grown to like Michigan a little bit more this summer. so so introducing the project, I guess the biggest question is GFDL CM4 a good representation for the Great Lakes? And two main objectives with this was first creating a climate report card, kind of highlighting some of its performance features in the Great Lakes, and then also looking at its bias and performance against observations. And it's also important to note, you're probably asking, there's a bunch of climate models, like why GFDL CM4 specifically. And early analysis proved when this model came out that it did really well in the northeastern quadrant of the US. And that is why Abby chose this model for the project. A little bit of background also, like, why do we care about climate models? In a changing climate, getting these regional projections and understanding this data is, really key, needing to plan and for our future, and also understanding, is this, good data, and how can we plan for the future, and, improving infrastructure. But also another big thing, I guess, is this data and is really important for adjacent fields, like many of you have mentioned in earlier talks, ecology and hydrology, just working through adjacent fields of many people here at GLRL. So introducing the first part of my project, this is the report card. This is up on the GLISA website, I think, in the last few, I think it went up 2 days ago. But so I created this mainly through literature. If anyone's interested in understanding more about the model, the first paper is really great at highlighting overview, and then the second focuses a little bit more on the ocean side of it, which probably people have less interest in. But also understanding, creating this report card is what has changed from GFDL CM3. And so highlighting a little specifics with the model. So, spatial resolution, temporal resolutions available, the time periods, and the different scenarios. Also, if, EASGF metagrids, a really easy way of downloading this data. And then I also highlighted the lake component, which I'm sure many of you are probably interested. And how to find this report card and other report cards in the future is just, going to the GLISA website. There's a lot of great material there that really focuses on, adaptive planning, and a lot of just great resources there, and other report cards for other climate models too. So switching gears to the second part of my project, which is mostly the analysis. So here, like my methods based off of, taking my observational data, mainly the ASOS and the NDVC stations, you can see on the right of the screen. So that's like the locations throughout the lakes. And then the ASOS stations over land. And then from the model, I looked at more variables than this, but I didn't include, kind of limited on what you can include in a slideshow, but mainly looking at air temperature, surface temperature, and then precipitation. And with that, was able to find four main things for my analysis, which was seasonal mean temperature, seasonal lake temperature, temperature distribution, seasonal precipitation daily mean, and trying to really understand the biases between for the model and the observations for these four. Also, before I get into the results, just a little bit about challenges and limitations between comparing stations and models. Models is 1 degree spatial resolution over land, and so that's about 110 kilometers, and that can be really difficult when comparing to a point-based station. Another big difficult is model output is continuous, and some stations have a lot of gaps. You can see here, like this Detroit station, just nothing happened between May 29th and June 6th. And this is a reoccurring problem between a lot of our stations, is really trying to have to fill in the gaps and make the right analysis based off of that. And that posed some issues. And then the third thing is also just like John mentioned a little bit with ice, is ice was sometimes can limit things. So this is the buoys like get pulled out in the winter, and so we have much less data to work with, which can also skew results. So station coverage is another limitation. So the first variable I want to look at is seasonal mean temperature, and so this is for the winter. And so looking here is just a 1-to-1 plot where your blue dots are your ASOS stations and your green triangles are your buoys that are in the lakes. And anything above would indicate that the model is warmer than the observations, anything below colder. And so you can see here that we have a cold bias. Looking here, you can see no notable biases between spring and summer. And then you can see in the fall, another significant cold bias can be seen. Moving on to lake temperature. So this was taking surface temperature from the model and then comparing it to the water temperature from the buoy stations. And you can just see here, I guess this is where some of the difficulties in trying to make these comparisons between the model and the stations is like one grid cell can represent 6 stations in a lake. That's just pose a lot of issues and really trying to do a complete analysis. But then you can also see like we have over near Lake Erie, like it's half on land, half on water. It just, smoothing out results is a common theme, I think, in the struggles of trying to do climate modeling compared to point-based stations. And these are the throughout things. So I highlighted fall on the earlier slide, and then you can see here throughout that we probably see our best performance overall in spring. Before I get into precipitation, I want to talk a little bit. Precipitation was probably the hardest comparison to make. And like, again, spatial resolution is one of them. And that's specifically because precipitation, I think, is where you can see the most like subgrid processes. Lake effect snow being the most notable one that everyone likes to talk about. And this can like really tend to miss things. Like a lake effect snowband can be very narrow. And, a grid is, 110 kilometers. So sometimes just smoothing out those, extremes that ended up happening, and that can kind of make it really difficult comparing a station to a grid cell, especially for precipitation. And then another issue is with precipitation, we found the most difficulty with our stations in missing data, but also difference between how different stations show that missing data and also recorded some inconsistencies between there has been really difficult. So specifically, I'll show, again, winter for precipitation. So you can see here, I highlighted Watertown, New York, if anyone's ever been there. They average in the Tug Hill Plateau about 200 inches of snow a year, and they would be represented here by a very dark shade of blue, which would make sense, but you can see the grid cells surrounding are, under representing that, and that just shows that smoothing out of results. But then I can also point out where we've seen some issues with stations. And so like Toledo, Ohio, which you would not expect to be a large lake effect snow driving city, reported a very high amount of precipitation. This just raises some of our questions about some of our ASOS data and, how can we farther clean this data and improve it to make the better comparisons in the future. But looking at throughout the different seasons, where we saw our best results was pretty much over Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, some parts of southern Michigan, and then but you can see, you probably have noticed some in like northern Michigan where we have some specific stations that have been difficulties, and that'll be something to look into more in the future, going station by station and understanding, how can we really dive into that data and say, okay, these seasons are not good, and that's something that's hard to do in a short period of the summer. And then lastly, I want to look at temperature distributions, just understanding, how understanding, are we getting the distributions right in the model? Are they, showing the extremes? So let's look at winter, for instance. You can see we would expect a left skewed distribution here because Great Lakes at this time experiences a lot of cold extremes. And like I mentioned earlier with just temperature, the model had a cold bias overall, and you see that cold bias, that slight shift. But the ASOS generally matches the distributions in temperature, and then you see with the buoys more narrow, and that was also like the lack of data that we had because of the ice in winter. And then overall, you can see the distributions throughout the months, throughout the seasons. Model was a little more had a more narrow distribution in summer, something to look at. Overall, this is comprising every one of our kind of variables and looking at, and you can see more blues than reds, I guess, in this chart, and showing that overall we saw a cold bias in most cases, and spring was our best performing season when it came to the model trying to capture against observations. And so summarizing overall, GFDL CM4 was able to reproduce a lot of the seasonal patterns and precipitation and temperature fairly well, but some noticeable biases existed, predominantly a cold bias, some underestimation of variability in temperature, which can be noted, not be able to capture those extremes enough, and also just not being able to replicate complex, precipitation patterns. And this is likely contributed again to the 1 degree over land, coarser spatial resolution and the smoothing of localized features. But again, this work is really important in continuing our regional climate adaptation, informing stakeholders, not just here at NOAA and just state agencies and really across the entire Great Lakes region on how can we prepare for the future and really understand, are these models a super valuable tool in capturing these very unique lake atmosphere interaction that we have here in the Great Lakes. And what's really cool is this fall can be continuing to do this work and cleaning up some station data and continue to refine my methods and hopefully extend more analysis and continue working with Abby. And I'm very excited about that. So, and that is all I have for you. Any questions?
Great job, Ronnie. We've got time for questions before we have our picnic.
Thank you. Yeah, really great talk. I was kind of surprised to see so many stations still available at all for your winter, your December, January, February. Did you see how many of if those were like really front loaded, especially on the lake? I know the land-based stations are there all year, but are they really front loaded in December? Do you know?
You mean like the buoys? Like, is there? What do you mean by front loaded? Like,
I mean, they typically take them out earlier in the year, but sometimes they get left a little bit longer out there. So I'm just curious if like all of that data is from December, and then you don't have anything for January or February on that buoy data.
I'd have to look a little bit more into like the actual buoys themselves. I probably didn't do enough analysis specifically to understand. I probably couldn't answer that question right now, but that'll be definitely something to look at more in the fall.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, just a comment on that. I think the NDVC data set has a lot of C-band stations and other land-based stations that do continue with a lot of outages too through the winter. So the number of buoys that get pulled out of that data set it's not even half. Yeah, no, NDVC includes a lot of shore-based C-band stations and things like that. Yeah. Yeah, maybe that distinction was made in the data set already. But...
Got one, Ronnie. This might be a little ignorant, not being a modeler. But are there opportunities to improve the spatial resolution?
So I guess kind of continue doing work in the fall is kind of the reason you do this analysis kind of comparing is what we have at 1 degree, but a lot of people are really interested in what Abby's basically working on is just downscaling this. I don't know to what resolution specifically, 10 kilometers. So that's very exciting, and a lot of work within climate modeling is really trying to downscale these things, but making these early observations on how it does is yes. So I guess overall, yeah, there's a lot of work on being done on getting a better resolution to make better comparisons.
Cool. All right, I'm going to check online. I don't see any more online. So as long as there's no more questions, I think we will thank everyone for their great presentations.